by courts, that's even worse. But ultimately, we've got to get serious about having a desire to have a country that celebrates the diversity that's here. This is a mosaic of over 2,000 different religions and perhaps 20 million free thinkers, agnostics, humanists, non-believers, whatever, however one wants to characterize themselves. These are our neighbors, our co-workers, the people we work with every day. And I think that America is way ahead of politicians in our willingness to accept the diversity that's truly representative of this country. I really wish, as we enter another political season, Ed, that more people, including in the press, this is not just a problem in the public, but the press ought to be satisfied when you ask a candidate, what's your religious background? And the candidate says, religion is personal, I don't want to talk about it. That should be enough. Unfortunately, now we see not only George Bush wearing religion on his sleeve, both sleeves every day, talking about religion. Many of the contenders for the Democratic nomination also talk about religion, sometimes wading into the waters of shark-infested theological foolishness, as I've sometimes said. Here we've got Howard Dean announcing that his favorite book in the New Testament is Job, which of course is in the Old Testament. And we find, of course, that earlier President Bush, the first President Bush, once read a speech in which he talked about one of his favorite Bible passages, John 16:3. Which of course reversed John 3:16, which of course many people hold up at football games. So I mean, once you wade into these waters, Ed, you at least better know what you're talking about. Or even if you are a sincerely religious person, you look like you're not. You look like you're simply pandering to people because you want their votes. And I think it made tremendous sense for Article 6 of the Constitution to say there shall be no religious test for public office. The President of the United States has said he won't appoint judges who don't believe our rights come from God. That should immediately have caused everybody in the Senate to say, well, send us some people who have secular qualifications, not religious ones. But even when the Democrats controlled the Senate, they didn't do that.
Barry Lynn, if you were giving the State of Union address instead of President Bush, what do you suppose it might sound like?
You mean that would be after I would fall, get up after fainting, because I know, to my knowledge, I'm not even running for public office. But I think the State of the Union, when it comes to the Constitution, is certainly grimmer than I've seen it in my lifetime of 55 years.
Wow.
I think the politicians are pandering so much to the 18 to 20% of the electorate that self-defines itself as evangelical conservative voters that they really are trampling upon, or at least talking about trampling upon, the rights of the rest of Americans. I'd say the State of the Union is still strong if we're talking about people, and if we're talking about a willingness of people to think through issues and to be rational about what they're doing. But when you find these politicians pandering to that important special interest core of 18% of these born-again conservative, politically conservative voters, it does skew elections. It helps to define, for example, what happens in Republican Party primaries, because the Republican Party, which some have referred to as an appendage of the Christian right rather than the other way around, frankly, this was a very calculated decision. They could have used another party. They chose the Republican Party and now have effectively converted it into a promoter of their version of family values, which, to me is not my version of family values. Family values to me means you don't cut the social safety net in the country, you don't shred the right of people to have health care. But all of these things seem to be happening, and in exchange for it, the President, as he did in the State of the Union address, doesn't talk about all the budget cuts for social programs. He just talks about dumping a little money in the collection plate of a church and making everybody feel better because of it. That's fundamentally wrong, fundamentally immoral in the wealthiest country ever to exist in the history of this planet.
Yeah, now some of the recent actions by this president, such as his stand on illegal alien workers or his borrow and spend policies and the deficits he's building up, would probably normally alienate the right-wing voter. But he can get away with these things because, as I see it, they virtually have no other place to go. What percentage of the voting population do you think he has in his pocket, no matter what he does?
You know, I think that Karl Rove, of course, close advisor to the president, well, I got in a little trouble recently because Pat Robertson, of course, announced on January the 2nd that he had had a conversation with God, which he interpreted as meaning that George Bush would be elected, quote, in a landslide. So now God is now handicapping, not just picking, but handicapping elections. And of course that led to a lot of rude comments from people, including wondering why Pat Robertson, when he ran for president himself back in 1988, hadn't checked in with God first, knowing that he would lose. But I just said, when the Associated Press called me, Ed, I said, look, I think it's possible that Pat Robertson was talking to Karl Rove and merely thought he was talking to God. And it got me in a little bit of trouble. But I think that when you look at this, the president does have, and Karl Rove wants, to maintain this base of 18 to 20% of self-described Christian conservative voters, and to get 2 to 4 million more of them, Karl said this himself, out to the polls to re-elect the president. Now, you know what? In America, the truth is you can vote for people on any basis at all. You can vote because of their religion or their shoe size or their favorite movie of all time. But I'd like to think that Americans, in fact, do something different. And that is they listen to the answers. What is the policy of this president going to be? And make a decision based on how much that reflects their view of everything from economics to foreign policy to the U.S. Constitution and the kind of judges we'll have to interpret that Constitution.
Sounds like you'd like to take a quick break, maybe get a little tea.
Thank
Joe, have
you.
you thought of any questions? I'm down to one more.
No,
Nothing?
You've hit all the bases that
well,
I could do.
The last thing I want to do then is just wrap up with our show and ask you...
You know, I never plugged...
Okay.
Tape to speed.
Barry, our program is called the Atheist Forum, and so it would be natural, of course, for viewers to think that we're extremely hostile toward any mingling of government and religion. But this also affects the religionists in our audience and in our country. When government is intruded upon by religion, it really affects the freedom of religion for all Americans. Talk a little bit about why religionists should be so concerned about this.
You know, one of the things that the Constitution does is guarantee not only that government isn't going to make theological judgments, but also that the government won't intrude in those religious matters where government has no business. That if people want to operate a faith-based institution to serve their community, they have a right to do that without undue regulation. They don't get special rights, but they certainly get the rights to practice and exercise their religion. Whenever government starts to fund the ministries, for example, of some place anywhere in this country, you better believe that sooner or later federal regulations will come along with it. Of course, taxpayer oversight requires the scrutiny of the books, the records, the methodologies. And frankly, many religious groups, conservative as well as liberal ones, say, look, we don't want to take any government money because we don't want the strings that are attached. Why? Because the strings could strangle the vitality of the very programs that we're running. The other thing that religion supporters need to understand is that when the federal government starts having approved religion lists, you may be on it this year, you may be taken off of it next year. I was absolutely shocked when the president announced and had his Office of Faith-Based Initiatives near the White House say that they never met any pagans who had any social interest, and of course, therefore, they're not going to be getting any of this faith-based money. Earlier, they had said that the Nation of Islam, obviously too hateful to ever get any money. We can have our personal views about pagans, Methodists, atheists, anybody we want, but for the federal government to decide that some religions are too hateful or not sensitive enough, and to put it on a list to make them eligible for federal grants is absolutely a violation of Constitutional Law 101. But another sad example that this administration seems literally to be hostile to the very notion of separation of church and state, apparently not understanding that it does protect the church as well as whatever integrity is left in the state. Americans United, you know, is open to and loves to have more and more people who support our ideas from across the political spectrum. We've got Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Greens. We have no partisan involvement. We are equal opportunity attackers whenever anyone in any political party violates the principle of church-state separation. We don't hold back. If it's somebody who is of one party or another party, we criticize them. Our website is www.au.org. You can get all kinds of information about the many legal cases we're involved in, as we challenge, for example, a faith-based unit in an Iowa prison, as we challenge other displays of the Ten Commandments on public property in places like Washington State and the state of Maryland. And also to get information about our monthly magazine, Church and State, which is used by virtually every progressive group in this country to keep up to date, very much up to date on church-state issues as they happen all over the country. These are some of the tools that we use. We've also started to sponsor a daily radio program that's heard live in Los Angeles and on the internet at www.cultureshocks.com. That's another way to get out progressive ideas even in these most regressive of times.
And of course, you're celebrating now 11 years as the executive director of this organization.
Yes, I've gotten a few extra gray hairs over the tenure of my time at Americans United, but I'm about to enter now my 12th year, and this has been certainly one of the most important, absolutely the most important part of my entire professional career, because I think it's so important that this principle of church-state separation prevail in this country. It's probably the greatest single idea that this country has presented to the world as a matter of intellectual contribution. And we got it right over 200 years ago. I hope we don't get it wrong 200 years later.
Well, Barry Lynn, on behalf of Atheists of Florida and the whole staff of the Atheist Forum, I sure want to thank you for appearing on our program.
It's been a delight.